Welcome to Encounter Grace, where we come face to face with God's work in the world for our good. Join host Jason McKnight as we explore practical issues of community, theology, and leadership in everyday life.
We're glad you're here. I'm joined in the studio with Ben Hendricks. We're together a lot in this, my partner in crime. And we've got with us today a great friend of mine in ministry, Stephen Witmer. He's a pastor in New England at a small town. He's an author, a co-founder of a group called Small Town Summits. And he's here in Kinston. And we're going to talk today about New England, jolly old England, pastoring, and God's work in small towns throughout the country, throughout the world. Stephen, thanks for being with us.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So the book that really has gained the most traction that you've written is called A Big Gospel in Small Places. And it's about really smaller town ministry. Why did you write this? Where does this come from?
Yeah, so the book, I have been at my church for almost 13 years now, as of June.
That's great.
And I think sometime maybe in year 9 or 10, I began to think more. I just began to be more self-aware about the kind of ministry I was doing. I think a lot of small town pastors are doing ministry, and they're not really thinking I'm doing small town ministry.
Right.
They're just kind of doing ministry.
Yeah.
Which I think there's some benefit to that. But also there's an advantage to being, I think of it as kind of vocationally self-aware, like a vocational awareness that I'm doing a certain kind of thing. Like ministry anywhere is ministry. Mm-hmm. But I started to think, I think maybe like year 9, 10, 11, just to become aware that there were particular challenges, particular advantages to doing ministry in a smaller place. And I had been, I would say, for as long as I've been in pastoral ministry, from early on, there were things about just being more on the outskirts, more on the periphery, that I found sometimes helpful and exciting, but often maybe a little lonely. Just kind of questioning at times, like, is what I'm doing, does this count as much?
Right.
Right. When we came through seminary 20 years ago, I would say even at that time, and in our seminary, there was a privileging of urban ministry. Our heroes were urban pastors. Mm-hmm. And so landing up, for me, unexpectedly in a small town, I just began, even from the early days, to wonder, okay, is this less than?
Right. A consolation prize.
Exactly, or Team B or JV, Mm-hmm. So it was
You've
really
heard them all, I see.
It was out of that struggle, and then increasingly becoming aware that this is a distinct social context. That I wrote the book.
That's great. I love the book. I read it. First time I read it was 2 years ago, I think, soon after it came out. But before it won all the awards, I mean, Christianity Today, Kevin DeYoung's, top 10 books for that year or whatever, Gospel Coalition Places. I mean, it's really a well-written study and very pastoral, very encouraging. Did your wife teach you how to write like that?
Emma's trained as an English teacher. It didn't win a CT award. It did win a TGC award.
Okay, all right.
It was actually, I've written a number of things over the years, and this was probably the one I felt the most helped by God to write. And so I think part of it was because I was writing, there was this kind of coming together of what I was doing full time, then reflecting on that. And then also my New Testament background and training, that was utilized. It was probably the writing that felt like it brought together the most sides of who I am and my gifting and my background. And our church sent us away on a sabbatical at, I think it was the 10-year mark of being there. And so
almost biblical. They're 3 years late.
That's right. So we had 2 months away, and we spent part of that time just having fun as a family. But I had three weeks where I was working during the days to write, and 3 weeks where I did nothing but write. I got away. We were in Northern Ireland with my wife's family, and 3 different relatives or family members gave us their little cottages on the Irish Sea. Wow. And so some of those places I didn't have a working phone, I didn't have a car, I couldn't go anywhere. I just write. Wow. And I was so intimidated early on because it felt like this enormous pressure. I sat down the first day that I had, and I knew that there's this limited time that I have to, and I've been thinking about it and writing articles and stuff, but now my laptop's open in front of me, and I want to write something. I want to make this time count. And I was quite intimidated by it. The clock is ticking. I'm an hour in. I'm 2 hours in. Like, this is a finite period of time. And I usually, for me, writing is hard work. I do it not because I love it, but because I want to have written.
Right.
And there was a joy in this writing, and there were just breakthrough moments, and it was still hard work, but I felt very helped by God to do it.
I think I also I found that just as I was reading through the book, I was really encouraged by mainly two things. One, just the humility that you had throughout the book.
Yeah, that's true.
Just the way that you would write, but also the encouragement. Just, I walked away from that book being encouraged to be doing ministry in a small town. Like, this isn't second rate. This isn't some mistake. I didn't just like fail in varsity and have to go to JV. No, this is specifically where God's called me. And, there's certain things that we can be doing and certain strategies to take and like certain outworkings of the ministry in which God's called us to. So thank you for that. I wasn't sure if I should thank you or the second writer. Or,
yeah, thanks for saying that. I mean, I one of the things I wanted to really try hard to do was emphasize the significance and importance of small place ministry without denigrating a large place ministry and pitting them over against each other, because I feel like it's actually gone the other way. Sometimes in the the passion people have to call people to the city, right, which is a great passion. I want more Christians to move to the city, but I think in making that strong case, sometimes small towns, rural areas have been put down as though, and almost like you to strengthen your case for urban ministry, you need to say, well, it's folks in the hinterlands are doing okay.
Right.
And it's not gonna help at all if we elevate the significance of small town ministry by putting down the importance and urgency of urban ministry. So I'm glad if that came through. I think that's so important in having this conversation. Yeah. We're all on the same team. The gospel needs to go to every single person. We want people everywhere to hear and treasure the gospel. So it's like our job is not to persuade people to go to a certain place. I feel like my job is just in my little way is to open people to be able to be called by God to go to a place. But for a lot of folks, a lot of seminary grads, at least in the years when I was coming through seminary, that wasn't even really a viable contender to go to a town like my town, Pepperell, if you wanted your life to count.
Right.
If you wanted to be an influencer, that you wouldn't consider it. So you wouldn't even hear God calling. And what a shame if God is calling you and you're not even in a place where you can hear that. So I just want to shake people loose enough to be open to going wherever God, to surprising you.
And it's interesting because in seminary, and you went to Southern, so it's an attractor seminary from all around, and Gordon Conwell, North Shore of Boston, and so also a lot of people from around the country. In seminary, there's that model of, well, if you want your life to count, you got to go. So in Eastern North Carolina, where we're podcasting from, there is also a little bit of, well, who would go to the city? Like, some people are like, well, I'm so glad I'm here and I'm in a small town. And you don't want to denigrate those who are called ministry vocation or any vocation to be part of God's work also in the bigger cities of Greensboro, Raleigh, Charlotte, and things like that. Yeah,
I think that's right. We have seen so clearly in the last 4 years, especially politically, the divides between country and city, culturally, politically, and it absolutely runs both ways. The city can look down on the country. The country can be angry at the city. And Robert Wuthnow, the Princeton sociologist, wrote a book a couple of years ago. it was after the 2016 election, trying to understand and help others understand Trump voters, rural Trump voters, largely white, rural Trump voters. And it was called The Left Behind. And he's trying to help folks understand who these people are who voted for Trump.
Yep.
And, one of the things he points out is this antipathy that runs from the country to the city. So it's not a one-way, not a one-way street. And to me, that's just a reminder that people everywhere need the gospel. We sort of build ourselves up by pushing other people down.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, which that's the gospel. Well, let's press pause on that for a little bit and let's talk family, because I think you're also married.
Yeah, I am married 15 years yesterday.
15 years. And Emma, how did you meet your sweet wife Emma? You mentioned about being in Northern Ireland on sabbatical and her family's there. Okay, tell us that story, because you're not from Northern Ireland.
Yes, so you and I knew each other at Gordon Conwell. I was there 2000 to 2003. Were those the same years you were
I
there?
came in 99 to 03.
Okay.
I took a little longer than you. I'm not as smart.
I had already done 2 years that I transferred in, so yeah, there's no smarts about it. So I finished in 2003, and then I moved to England, to the University of Cambridge for 4 years to do a PhD in New Testament studies and to teach for a year. And while I was there, actually the first Sunday I was there, I was looking for a church. I heard about a couple good churches. I heard about Eden Baptist that a lot of people have gone to, and I heard about St. Andrew the Great in Cambridge, which is an Anglican church. It's about as close to a Baptist church as you could ever get at an Anglican church. It's pretty low church Anglican,
but
very
with the
evangelical.
name Andrew the Great.
That's right. So I went. I went the first Sunday, and I never went anywhere else. I really enjoyed it. I benefited from it. It was my church home for those 4 years, and I met my wife Emma there. She had come to Cambridge several years before to do a teaching degree. Then she taught high school English outside of Cambridge. She was volunteering with the college ministry of the church, and then they asked her to come on staff. So when I started volunteering with the college guys, she was already on staff working with the college women. Nice. And she's from Belfast, Northern Ireland, so that's how we met.
Isn't that how you met your sweet wife? Somehow volunteering together at church?
Yeah, we worked at a kids camp that wasn't anywhere near an Ivy League school. But yeah, more or less just getting to do that. And then, hey, there's something there, getting to serve right next to your wife.
Well, that was the point I was
future
going to
wife,
make. Yeah. You know, where you're hanging out is where you meet people. And they're, when you're hanging out with the Lord's people, it's a great place for college kids to be.
And for like Janessa, I mean, much more godly. And just getting to see me serve was like, wow. Yeah.
He almost said much more godly at the time. I realized, wait a minute.
I would never.
So how has Emma adjusted to being a New Englander?
Yeah. So we've been at the church for 13 years. We lived at Gordon Conwell for a year. So she's been in the U.S. for 14 years. And I would say the first probably 4, 5, or 6 years were more difficult. It was a good adjustment culturally to move from Cambridge to Gordon Conwell, because Gordon Conwell has a pretty large international community. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so so that was really helpful. But then we moved to a small town of Pepperell, and there are actually a few Brits in Pepperell and some in our congregation, so that was helpful. But I would not say that Pepperell is a cosmopolitan place.
How many people live, like what is the population of Pepperell?
About 12,000.
12,000, okay.
Yeah. And we're an hour northwest of Boston,
okay.
About 20 minutes from Nashua, New Hampshire. So I would not say we're out in the middle of nowhere, but we're also, it is, genuinely a small town. So that was a challenge for Em, just culturally, finding her feet in a new country and feeling far from home. Like we decided early on when we knew we were going to be married that we would just prioritize traveling home frequently to her family. So we try to do once a year, and we just budget for that and don't do other things so that we can do that. That's really important for her and for our kids with their grandparents and cousins, and aunts and uncles. So that's been a big value for us. And I would say the key for Emma in making that transition has been really it dovetails with what we're talking about, small town ministry kind of stuff, because it's been increasingly becoming part of the church and the community, the broader community, having our kids in school. And so Emma's meeting all sorts of other parents, and she's deeply invested in the life of the town. And we are established, we feel like home. So when, early on when we would go back to Northern Ireland and come back, it felt like leaving home.
Yep.
Increasingly, it feels like coming home. And there'll always be that, it's like, it's living between two worlds. It's inaugurated eschatology. It's the already not yet. It's not being fully home anywhere in this world. But so she has definitely felt that.
What would you say? I mean, I just think in this one, what would you say would, like, as we think of welcoming people into our community from internationally or just from other parts, or like New England is a little international if you're in Eastern North Carolina.
Yeah.
What are some things that help build bridges the best in your experience?
Yeah. It's I had this experience when I was living overseas that it's so meaningful to find other people who are also from where you are.
Yeah, it's true.
So when I was living in England, I would gather with the other Americans to celebrate Thanksgiving or watch the Super Bowl at crazy odd hours, trying to get a reception, and it was twice as meaningful, 10 times as meaningful. So connecting folks from other countries with their compatriots from those other countries, if that's possible. Sometimes that's not possible. I think another significant one is not assuming Americanness, in the not being overly patriotic in our worship services. Sure. I think that's the kind of sometimes American Christianity is so patriotic that we privilege America even in our worship services, and to us as Americans, maybe that's just part of the furniture. It's just normal. Yeah, we don't, but if there's someone from another country and you are putting a flag up on the on the overhead, on the screen or whatever for certain days, it can feel a little bit off-putting, like and so just making an extra effort to welcome people and include people goes a long way.
Our poor church here, because I'm Canadian by birth and American by choice, and so I got a little bit of schizophrenia sometimes. Yeah. Especially in the hockey playoffs. But anyway. Well, as you think of the South, like you're a New Englander. You grew up in Maine.
I did.
Is that right? Super small town, right?
700 people.
700 people. Something about the post office.
Well, my mom worked at the post office for years, and she knew. I mean, I would say she knew 95% of the entire town.
Wow, so she's better than the pastor, really.
Yeah, she had more exposure to everyone came to the post office. Yeah,
especially anyway. So from Maine, small town, to different places, Minneapolis, a little bit, UK, a real connection to Northern Ireland. You've had enough opportunity to see different people in different places. What as you come down to the South, which you've done several times and taught in different small town areas, what do you see when you come here? Like what's an outsider's perspective on what's going on in the South?
Yeah. I mean, I have the times I've been in the South and connected with believers, I've been very encouraged. I've seen some of this is just my limited exposure, but I've seen healthy churches and I've seen community engaged churches. So churches who really care about the gospel and who are not siloing away from the broader culture, but also engaging with community. I do think there are some. It's easy, I think, regionally to stereotype, sometimes in unhelpful ways. But I would say, at least from my exposure to various places, that New England is more post-Christian, and there are advantages and disadvantages to that.
Right.
And it even depends on where you go in New England. But so much of New England is kind of a cultural background with Roman Catholicism, but then kind of real allergy to that in many places, and so kind of a moving beyond Christianity.
Right.
And much more than would be the case, I think, here. And so there's going to be some significant drawbacks to doing ministry in New England as opposed to the South because of that, but also some advantages because in terms of just people assuming that they are Christians and coming because it's maybe socially advantageous. It's it's just the path of least resistance because that's what you do. I mean, that's a major challenge, I would think, for pastoral ministry here.
Yeah.
To try to help people realize that they're not actually Christians. There's a guy who came to Christ in our church a number of years ago, and I remember he said one time, I thought I was a Christian until I became one. And I think, I'm sure there are a lot of people who assume that they are Christians, and they're not actually believers. And so I would think part of pastoral ministry here is helping those folks.
It's very exciting in New England and a lot of places, in Montreal, Quebec, and a lot of places, to be in the book of Acts because it's pioneering ministry. People don't have an experience with Jesus at all. Yeah. I mean, church is so far out of their regular sphere of life. So it gets very exciting that way. Yeah,
that's right. I've been reading the Bible with a guy for the last couple of years who, when we started, he didn't have any background, so he didn't know how to find a chapter and verse in a Bible.
Right.
Didn't know what the books of the Bible were, and that's not. I would say that's not uncommon.
On the one hand, the joy is I don't want to say the joy, but it's happening here too. Like, we get to introduce people to Jesus for the first time more than you would think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I agree with you. Like, just as I do student ministry, but also with even some of our men, like, it just seems like, and I hesitate to use some of the word, but like there is a level of trauma and baggage that has come with growing up into a culture where everyone must be a Christian because that's the culture here. And so there is some level of like, sometimes you miss the excitement per se of getting to share the gospel with someone who's never heard it before. I mean, I spent all my life in the South, in almost the buckle of the Bible Belt, Nashville, right? And I remember the first time I met someone, and it was in Chicago, who had never heard the gospel. I'm like, oh, like I didn't even grow up Christian, really. And so it's just an interesting thing, like, of two very different worlds, and trying to make your way through them. Here's my question for you, because this is one that, when I learned this, it meant a lot to me, because the Lord's kind of given me a heart to be where I am, like, and if wherever He calls you to be there for as long as you can until He calls you somewhere else. And correct me if I'm wrong, you've been at your church for what, 12 years now?
Yeah, almost 13.
That's incredible.
Wow.
So, as I'm trying to answer this question here, just in 4, how in the world do you still find joy in the later years of ministry? And like, what are your favorite things? What are the things that just keep popping up that give life to you, just as you're doing ministry?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's a great thing to be at a church for over a decade. I mean, it's not necessarily a great thing. It could be very bad thing.
It's not automatically a great.
That's exactly right. I mean, there could be folks who stay because it's just the easiest thing to do, because there's job security, because whoever in the church, complacency, they can't kick you out. It's So there's lots of reasons why it's not a good thing. But if it's a healthy church and you're a relatively healthy pastor, it is a good thing to stay. I think there have been a number of things that have brought me joy and kept it fresh. One thing is that there's turnover in churches. So I'm not pastoring the same church I was 13 years ago. And there's disadvantages and advantages to that. One of the great advantages is that if you lead in a certain way, if you lead theologically, if you create healthy structures, anytime you lead as a pastor, there are going to be some people who respond well to that, and some people who really don't like it. And if you listen to them and you're consistent, even if you do all those things well, there are going to be some people who just say, I'm out of here. Yeah. But the good thing is, if you're leading in good directions, people will leave who aren't on board with that, but people will come who are attracted to it. And I found that as we formed culture in our church, it's a lot of the turning points where we lost people were that was defining us. So we adopted a robust form of church membership at our church. We hadn't had one before. Yeah. And we talked through issues of manhood, womanhood, and other theological issues. And some people left in each of those cases, and some people came because they said, I want a church that talks about those things and work is moving in that direction. Yeah. And so I found that's a challenge. You never like to see people leave, and those are painful conversations. But I have found joy in actually forming the culture of our church over time. You can do that obviously in 13 years in a way that you can't do in 3 years or even 8 or 9 or 10 years. So that's been good. Also, I feel like if you are raising up other leaders, and I think Jason is a great example of this, if you're raising up other leaders, then you will be able to give some things to them that you were doing early on, and then tackle new challenges, and both within the church and beyond the church, from the church to the broader church. And so that's been invigorating and life-giving to me, to see leaders being raised up in our church, and then to be able to minister from Pepperell Christian Fellowship to, like, through writing the book or whatever, So it's there's I feel like there's just I am not bored at all in my ministry, and there's more stuff to explore and more stuff to do. So I'm really grateful. I don't have any intention of moving away from my church. I could imagine, I always want to hold it loosely, that if God called us to somewhere else, we would be willing and obedient to go, but we're definitely not looking to move.
Yeah, I think one of the joys, I got this from your book, and just talking with you earlier, like, one of the joys of being in the church for so long, and I only know, coming up on 4 years, but is this joy that you get from living that integrated life with people, like over and over again, just getting to be in their lives and invite them into yours. Like they know what your house looks like, and how they spend their summers or however. And it's just like, it helps, I think, just build a foundation of ministry that is able to withstand those moments when people do leave, and you have those people who come to you and like, man, like, you can get through this, or we're with you in this. So that was just, thank you so much for that.
And even like in a small town, and when your family's far away, you end up having Christmas or Thanksgiving with a fun new family.
Yep.
And it's like, we've had several, just because all our family's in other places and we can't always get there. Yeah. And it's just all part of God's gift to us. Well, let me ask you one last question, because we'll wrap up. But zoom out from Pepperell, zoom out from the ministry God's given you, look nationally. What do you think God is up to right now in these COVID, sort of ending up COVID days, or maybe going longer, politically uncertain days? What do you sense God is doing?
Yeah, I was actually just looking this last week at a recent Gallup poll that came out at the end of March, that is showing that church membership, church participation, I guess even more broadly in that, houses of worship, so synagogues, churches, mosques, is the lowest it's ever been. It's a precipitous drop. It's down to 47% of U.S. adults from about 70% 20 years ago. Wow. So the turn of the century, turn of the millennium. So that's a dramatic drop. And I was listening to Russell Moore and Tim Keller thinking about that Gallup poll, and Tim Keller said, well, so you asked me what I think, I'm just going to tell you what Tim Keller thinks. See what I did there? Yeah, I like that. He basically said he thinks that a lot of nominal Christians, this kind of gets back to what we were talking about earlier, are going to, they're going to leave. The church is going to shrink. It's going to get down, he thought, not just to 47%, but to maybe 20% or 20 or 30% of American adults. Because it will become increasingly, as the culture secularizes, it will become increasingly less socially advantageous to be part of the church. And yet at the same time, he thought the church will become increasingly multi-ethnic.
Yes.
Because that's where a lot of the life of the church is right now. So in some ways you could look to New York City. That's all happening right now.
Right.
It's secular. It is secularized, and the church is multi-ethnic, and the church is eventually, he thought, going to grow again because it will get down to a core of really committed Christ followers.
Yeah.
So I find that pretty persuasive that in many ways the kind of easy period for Christians where you're going with the current to be part of your church is increasingly not going to be the case, which is not necessarily a bad thing for the church. The church has experienced this kind of thing before.
Right. The 70% attendance of 20 years ago and maybe that generation or so before that is not that way since time immemorial. There have been ebbs and flows all through. I mean, Mark Knoll and Rodney Stark talk about even at the time of the Revolution, church attendance was very low, far lower than the 20th century. But we all look back at that and think, oh, everybody was a Christian back then.
Yeah, great point.
And not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. But the gospel keeps moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, Stephen, thank you for sharing with us a little bit and encouraging us as we kind of seek to do life together here and watch for God's grace and encounter God's grace in our days. Thank you for joining us. We'd encourage you to like this and subscribe and leave a comment and share. Go visit Pepperell Christian Fellowship website and learn a little bit more about what Stephen is up to and the Lord's up to there. And we'll join you back here next time.
This is a ministry of Grace Fellowship Church in Kinston, North Carolina. Visit gracekinston.org or follow us on Facebook and Instagram.